Good morning and welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. Going to mix the three of them a little bit this morning. As you, both of you listeners out there remember, well, I try to strike Viewpoint with a kudo or two. And this morning I'd like to change that modus operandi just briefly and quickly here. This is the annual season when people begin to think about charities and giving little things, and that's a good thing. It's too bad we have to wait Christmas to get in a charitable mood, but I'd like for you to think in terms of local charities. You know, we all have to pick and choose our charities. There are so many good ones out there on the air. Two of those that you see on the television screen often are the Tunnels to Towers and Wounded Warriors. And I can support those very nicely. But most of us just have so much money to give a little bit, and we'd like to keep our giving as local as possible. And I'd like to mention a couple of young ladies who are teachers, retired teachers, who push Moms Who Care. And this is a real, maybe they might be listening, might want to call in and tell a little bit about Moms Who Care, but they buy things for kids in school who are in need. And so Cindy Ossiker and Marla Williams are the Moms Who Care teachers, retired teachers, and I'd like to do a little huckstering for them. While you're writing your checks, your charity checks, just think of Moms Who Care, and I'll make it easy for you. I'll be the go-between. If you'll send your envelopes to WLCN, P.O. Box 505, Atlanta, Illinois, 61723. That zip is 61723. Mark on your envelopes, Moms Who Care, and Bill will be happy to make sure that money gets where it's supposed to be, and it won't be at Old Joe's. No, I'm going to be serious about that. Those two ladies have done already a tremendous amount of good for our kids in school. So I'm going to doff my hat and mention them in our charitable giving. Mrs. Bubley, we have a guest who's come all the way from Florida, so I think we ought not to waste any more airtime. Not that I think asking for charity for Moms Who Care is a waste of time.
Is it my turn?
Yeah. We don't allow dead air up here.
Do you want to welcome me? Yes, we have two interesting guests today. John Fuller is the author of a new book called A Deeper Dive into the Good Government Council of Logan County. I've heard that referred to on more than one occasion, and it must have been quite an era here in Logan County. There was a lot of dissension among different people, and it was people whose names you'd recognize. And he's written this interesting book, and the proceeds, part of the proceeds are going to go to the Genealogical Society here locally. And we have also with us today, in addition to John Fuller, we have Bill Donath, who's with the Genealogical Society. Thank you very much. So think about this. I assume, Mr. Donath, that the book would be available at your digs at the Genealogical Society?
It will be. John has a couple of things set up this week, a couple of book signings and presentations that people will be able to get books during that time.
Good. John, tell us the where and when.
The first event is tomorrow night, Thursday night, which is the 18th at Lincoln College. It's in the McKinstry Library in a lecture hall they call the Lyle Lecture Hall, which I'm not familiar with it, but I think it's one of the first buildings you see as you approach the Lincoln College campus. Anyway, 7 o'clock Thursday night, and we'll be also the next day. Some people couldn't make that one, so we've had another event downtown at the Guest House Coffee Shop. Again, I've been gone so long, I'm not familiar with these places. But
that's a nice little place.
It's on the middle of the block on Kickapoo Street, straight across from the courthouse, and this is going to be Friday morning at 9:30 until about 11 or so, whenever. and people can come in and these books, this is a self-published book, and all the proceeds, 100%, I'm giving it's a limited printing, about 85 copies is all that we have. And,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You're down to that?
And maybe we'll have a lot left over, or maybe we won't. I don't know. But whatever they bring in, and it's going to be $35 a copy. But whatever they bring in, it's going to be 100% their money, and they'll get to keep it. So hopefully, it's about $3,000 to $4,000. So
That's wonderful. That makes
That would
quite a
be
difference to
wonderful.
you, Mr. Donath. That's a
Yeah,
big contribution.
And we're really grateful of John's generosity on this project. Getting the book out is important, but it's nice that the Genealogy Society is going to benefit from it.
Well, he invested
You know-
a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in reminiscing and going back and digging up family comments and records and so forth. Took you a while to put this tome together, sir.
yeah, it didn't dawn on me. When all these events were taking place, I was roughly 5 years old. So I got one picture in the book of me riding on a detasseling machine in the Centennial Parade in 1953. And that was about all I knew about Roy Clapper, who many people will remember was the organizer of the parade. And he's a main character in this book. Roy was a real driving force behind the effort that this group got together. And by the way, the book is printed at Lincoln Printers here in town. They did a really
Local
good job
printers,
on
that's
it,
good.
I think, and pretty fast. But anyway,
I'm assuming Roy is Mr. Inez Clapper.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be true?
Line Clapper, yeah.
And lots of people would know her name
Right.
because she was a teacher in District 27 for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Roy had the appliance and tire store down there on Kickapoo Street, and I remember after he passed away, I remember buying my first Beatles album there. He sold the records and the record players and things like that.
Yes, as a matter of fact, those are the days of LP records, long playing
Yeah.
records. None of the CD disc business. And they had them stacked in rows, and people would stand there and they look, file through them and drop through them and looking for their favorite record.
Yeah.
And those were 78 RPMs at those days.
Yeah.
Back in the day when we moved to Lincoln, it was common to tell people who weren't third or fourth generation here that, oh, well, you wouldn't know. You're not from here. Well, everybody's from somewhere, and I was too.
Yeah.
Did you come
And-
on Conestoga wagon when you came here?
Yes, I did.
I wondered about that.
I did. But this book is so interesting because the names are of people whose name you'd recognize easily.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about the root of this book, please.
Well, there's the story, and then there's how the book came together. I'm like a lot of people. You have things that for your parents, you inherit the scrapbooks and the memorabilia and things like that, and you don't know what to do with it. And my mom had a scrapbook full of newspaper clippings that sat on the shelves or in storage rooms and basements over the years as they moved around. And my dad had a bunch of audio tapes. He was kind of a geeky guy. I get some geekiness from him. But he had these audio tapes that he made of some of these meetings because he was one of the organizers of it. And so I came across these things, and I sort of heard about it before, but they never talked about it much. And I started putting it together and was having trouble making heads or tails of it. And then I want to mention Lee Henson's website doesn't get enough credit. It's if people hearing this broadcast remember three words: findinglincolnillinois.com. You go there and you'll find out more things about Lincoln. So I went there and I found out what he had about this Good Government Council, and this is all taking place in the early 50s. It morphed from one thing to another. It started with Adlai Stevenson having big state police raids on the businesses had, you call them today, maybe business stimulator. They'd have a pinball machine or some kind of gaming device there that they could generate a little extra revenue for their business. And there was a conflict between state and federal laws about what was legal and what wasn't. And the short version of the story is Adlai Stevenson decided they weren't legal, and so he came in late at night and raided these places.
From Rockford to Cairo.
Yeah, all over the state.
Yeah.
And during a trial came out of that in January of 1951. The raids were in the fall of 50. By the way, they put the machines down under the grandstand at the fairgrounds for storage until the bad weather hit, and then they moved into the basement of the courthouse and finally got whatever coins out of them that were. But and then they took them out to the dump and busted them up with sledgehammers and burned a pile of them out there. It was quite Lee has pictures of it. And this trial, testimony started to come out about fees being collected from these owners that had these machines, and it just totally unintentionally came out that some fees were being collected by some justices of the peace at the time that were not being turned in to the county. And the backdrop of all this, there was Bill may remember, and I just went through a tape the other night. The Farm Bureau was having meetings. There was a big discussion about taxation and equalization of taxes on farmland, and people were getting real roughed up in their minds about, they were getting irritated about the taxation, which is not a new thing particularly. But in that backdrop, they said, if we're going to pay all these taxes, we don't want the money being unaccounted for, and that's what came out of that trial. But nothing seemed to be done about it. So an ad hoc committee group, whatever you want to call it, got put together of irritated citizens, and a guy named Bernard Mayberry, I think, was pretty central in putting that together. And he had some motives, because he was planning to run for state's attorney, and I think he thought, well, besides it being, he thought in his mind, a good thing to do, this would be something that he could run on for that office. And Ed Mills was the state's attorney at the time, and was apparently had announced he was not going to run again for the office. So Bernard Mayberry ran for it, and two camps developed in town, and people were kind of, so I put in the book about, we talk about social distancing today of 6 feet. I think I'm speculating, but I'm thinking at the Hotel Lincoln and out at the Tropics and the Blue Inn, the social distancing probably got to be about 60 feet. In the small town, the people...
In fact, you're right.
The two camps. It's not hard to figure that out, but I'm almost going to turn the tables, because Bill was here at the time, and Judy just reminded me, or I confirmed that she was a bailiff in the courthouse. And I think one of the upshots from this whole episode was the justice of the peace system in Illinois had been under criticism for years when all these events were going on. And it finally, people like Alan Dixon and a legislator at the time, they started a committee to look at the system, a 143-year-old justice of the peace system. And they said there were some people that got involved in that system that were not on the up and up, and they were not turning in all their fines. So they could check down with the Secretary of State's office or State Treasurer's office how many tickets were issued for overweight trucks here at Kruger Elevator, for instance, or these tickets would be issued, but the money wasn't deposited into where it was supposed to be deposited with the county. So the county treasury was suffering from lack of money that it should have had. And as this became public knowledge, people got upset about it, so they formed this committee. And there's the whole backdrop of the McCarthy era, and communists under every bed and behind every drape, and you mentioned being from out of town. There was this resentment that they went to Springfield they brought some people in, the Taxpayers Federation of Illinois, The future mayor of Springfield, Nelson Howarth, was brought in as an attorney to help him out. And I'll stop there, but people went at each other for a few years. Some lawsuits came out of it, and it dragged on for quite a while. One lawsuit was after my dad and 17 other people, in today's dollars, a lawsuit was filed against them for, it amounted to about $2 million apiece in today's money. And it didn't go anywhere, fortunately, but it took 3 or 4 years for it to not go anywhere. So I'll stop there. And
What was the general feeling of the plain people here in this area, or any part of Illinois, since I'm sure it was statewide, actually?
First, before you answer, John, I'd like to put out the station number 648-5510. Our guest this morning, John Fuller, has written a book called The Deeper Dive, and that was about a time in Logan County he talked about social distancing. Well, there was a lot of social distancing. There was some dissension in the community. Those guys don't know what they're doing, and they ought to dig deeper. Different paces of opinion. The sole purpose of John's purpose this morning is to sell his book, and the sole purpose of that is the Logan County Genealogical Society would be the recipient of some extra money, and Gordon knows they could use that right now. Bill Donath is with us this morning, representing the Genealogical Society. I'm going to interrupt your story just a minute, John, to ask Bill a question about. They have been closed now for some time as a result of being smoked out, if that's probably the best expression I can use. So, Bill, tell us just a little bit about that and how soon you hope to open. Then we're going to get back to John's book called A Deeper Dive.
Well, we're working on getting the smoke smell cleared out of the building. We had no other damage other than smoke. No fire damage,
That's good.
No water damage. So we're in good shape that way. It's just a matter of making it a livable space again where we can go in and do our work and not get choked up while we're in there. So we've got a company coming in to do that, and they'll get started here pretty quick as soon as the insurance company approves what they want to do.
Well, that smoke just permeated the whole area, because I know our state bank was closed for a while because of the smoke.
Yeah, they're still cleaning on the state bank.
And I don't know, today, are they open?
I saw them cleaning in there Monday. I don't know if they were planning on the 18th of tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So we'll see if they get it done that fast.
So the bottom line is, if we can sell a few books today, and by the way, don't hesitate, because Mr. Fuller indicated that their inventory was a little low now. And by the way, the book was printed. I want to give a little credit to Lincoln Printers right here on Broadway. Right behind the post office there, and they did a nice job of putting together that book, Mr. Fuller. And so you might want to avail yourself of a little opportunity to do a little delving into history. My goodness, that's 70 years ago now. Hard to believe. Mm-hmm. I was even a young kid then, I think. I'm not sure. But in any event, there was a group, and John's father, Ken, and Leroy Clapper, who was a businessman, ran a tire shop there across from the Lincoln Theater, right behind the old First National Bank, and Bernard Mayberry, and a fellow named Sheffield Branwell. I believe he was a county board member at the time, John,
yes,
if I'm correct on that.
Yes.
And there are other names that I'm forgetting, but they come to mind immediately.
Bob Downing.
I'm sorry?
Robert Downing.
Oh, yeah.
Harold
That's
Kendick.
right, yeah. Well, I'm frank to tell you that this is an old man's opinion now, 70 years later. I don't think that was a very good time in our county. We had people who were friends who became not friendly, sided up one time or another, and so it's interesting to go into the history of the Good Government Council, because very candidly, I don't think much came of it when it was all said and done. Am I correct in saying that, John?
Yeah, and that's one of the statements I saw. Somebody offered that opinion on Lee Henson's website by findinglincolnillinois.com. People said, well, there was a lot to do about not too much. And as I look through the history and the newspaper clippings that gathered together besides what my mom had. Today I had the advantage of being able to go online and search, word search and find articles. But
You can hold some of those things up because our camera will pick those up, Mr. Fuller.
all right, okay. And this, I'm not sure what's going to happen to them, but this is an example. It's a whole bunch of newspaper clippings here, and documents and letters that came out of my mom's files. And those, I'll maybe tell later what's going to happen to those. I'm not sure exactly. But the end result of this, one of the main things was this Justice of the Peace system. It wasn't totally done away with because of this event, but the publicity about this Good Government Council was not only in the Lincoln Courier newspaper, but Springfield, Decatur, Bloomington Panagraph covered it very routinely because there were so many events. All these articles resulted. But not only those papers, but there was an Iowa paper that had a little story because there was a Ken Goodrich connection to, he came from Iowa. Mm-hmm. And the Chicago Daily News, it routinely came down and reported on this. And yes?
There's a name that comes up, Chicago, George Thiem.
George Thiem. I
Now,
only
where did
saw
that
his
come
name.
from? That just popped out of nowhere.
Well, I'm interested that it would because
You thought I was just another pretty face, Jim.
Yeah. Do you remember reading his articles?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I saw his name on these as the byline on these clippings, and but he was apparently down quite a bit, and also the New York Herald Tribune, a New York paper, had a columnist there named Sokolsky, and he was a noted anti-communist ranter and raver about that subject. But he wrote in his column that he became aware of this little town in Lincoln, Illinois, and where this group got together and was causing all kinds of troubles, and outsiders were coming into the community, and a town that should just be fields of corn waving and be peaceful. And he says the ACLU was getting involved, and the NAACP came in, and it was a little bit racial in the way he wrote it, but the fact that it got attention that far away was interesting and to me, and that kind of publicity, and all up and down the state with this Justice of the Peace system, things like this were happening all over the place. And so, but the publicity on Logan County in all these papers, I think, was a big part of the fuel that in 1962 the legislature finally did away with that whole system of JPs, and they finally disappeared in 64. The legislation was passed in 62, but it took 2 years to get rid of them. We had about 20 JPs in Logan County. Mm-hmm. Each township had one. They were apportioned on population. Of East Lincoln and West Lincoln had large populations, so they each had 4 JPs in those townships. And some of these
Wasn't that kind of a lot? I mean, I can't imagine there would be that many. Wouldn't it be misdemeanors that they'd have to deal with, that they'd need 4 in a township?
Well, over the 143 years, their limits of authority would evolve, and one of the latest ones in the 50s, any misdemeanors and things under $1,000, involving less than $1,000 in the crime. I don't know if that's the penalty or the theft or whatever, but they had a defined limit. But if it got above that, then they had to kick it up to the county judge or the circuit court, and they would handle things. The JPs didn't handle murders or anything. They performed weddings, obviously. And
by the way, speaking of misdemeanors, I had the Federal Communications System looking over my shoulder. Once again, Mrs. Busby or I, about halfway into the program, and we've ignored some very important people, and that is people who sponsor Viewpoint. Go right ahead, James. Yeah, we're right back live in the studios here at WLCN, high on the windy hill here at County Road 2250, just a few steps north of Atlanta. Our guest this morning on Viewpoint, a young man who's come all the way from Florida to do some good for the Logan County Genealogical Society. John Fuller, former Lincoln man, served his country in the Air Force and learned how to fly an airplane, became a commercial pilot, has written a book called A Deeper Dive, and that's into a time of Logan County when things were, there's a little, quote, maybe I'm correct, John, unrest in the community. And accompanied John this morning is Mr. Bill Donath, representing the Logan County Genealogical. I can even say that. Isn't that amazing? In any event, the Genealogical Society has suffered a little problem there, a major problem, in that they were smoked out. And the proceeds from Mr. Fuller's book will benefit Genealogical Society. So find out, John's going to tell us a little bit where he's going to be having public appearances. Buy the doggone book. Sell them out. He just had a few left. And so, John, tell us about your public appearances, sir.
There's going to be two. There's one tomorrow night, Thursday evening, the 18th, at 7 o'clock, and this is at Lincoln College on Keokuk Street in Lincoln, in the McKinstry Library.
That's a lovely building, by the way.
I assume if they can find the building, they'll find the room that it's going to be in that night. And then the next morning, we'll be downtown in Lincoln on the square at the Guest House Coffee and Pastries shop, right in the middle of the block on Kickapoo Street, across from the courthouse. And that'll be at 9:30. We'll have books there, and I think Diane told me it's just cash or check. She wanted the bill.
Cash or check, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So no credit cards, but or you can contact them on they have a website. And what's the website? Can you?
Logan County, Illinois, but the county and Illinois are abbreviated, so it's LOGANCOIL, and our .net.
Well, I bet if you Google
.org.
I bet if you Google Logan County, the words Logan County Genealogical and his history.
Oh yes, it'll get there.
Speaking of Googling, let's throw a little hat in the air for Lee Henson, former Lincoln man who's quite an historian. I suspect he was probably a good history professor, too, at the time he was actively teaching at college. Lee has done a yeoman's job in chronicling things of interest in Logan County in the past. And so let's throw a little kudo towards Lee. By the way, part of his family, Lois Wilson, Lois Leisman now, was in high school with me, so that dates her a little bit.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and Lee's website, again, is just remember the words findinglincolnillinois.com, and it'll take you there, and you can, if you want, you can spend hours. I haven't been through all of it yet. There's just so many fascinating things on it. And anyway, he's been very supportive of this, and we've gone back and forth and compared notes, and
so how long did it take you to put this book together? There's a lot of research went into that,
well,
Mr.
I
Fuller.
started looking at the material about 3 years ago, and but ended up having to do a lot of scanning. And the audio tapes, I had to find somewhere a reel-to-reel tape player, and then figure out how to use a converter to convert that analog signal to digital, so I could get it in the computer, and then find software. You couldn't understand a lot of it. It was just hard to hear. Some of it was very clear, but some of it was recorded a little fast. But I found some software where I could clean it all up and make it hearable to the point that I could make transcripts of it. I thought, how am I going to share this with people on a wider scale? So listening over and over, probably dozens of times to the same conversation, I would sit and make the transcript, and the transcripts are in the book, in the last part of the book. Most of the book it's really a collection of these things. My writing it's a 250-page book, and the first 50 pages are things that I wrote and comments about the background of it, but the other 200 pages are scanned images of newspaper clippings and transcripts of audio tapes, and a few letters and documents that go in there from people like Bob Woods was an attorney that was involved in the defense of these people, and again, this thing, things are never done. The other night I was listening to another tape again, and it was a Farm Bureau meeting taking place in March of '52, and the big subject was taxation of farmland and city property, and the equalization, making it fair to assess someone's property and then tax them on it. You want to make sure you've appraised it appropriately. So they had expert Bob Downing, later would become chairman of the county board, but he was involved with the Farm Bureau. He farmed out by Beeson. He introduced Fred Hoppin, another person, and Harold Tendick, a farmer from down by Mount Pulaski. They were talking about the differences in soils between, like, Scully Prairie. You take a soil sample there, but you go down in the Lake Fork and Salt Creek bottomland, it's different, and those may produce differently. So to tax them at the same rate was not fair, and this was a big subject at the time. There was a lot of talk about it, and so that brought up, they said, so it raised people's sensitivity about, well, your taxation and money being paid in, and everybody's willing to pay their taxes, but we want it to be on a fair and equal basis. So that was kind of an atmosphere that was behind all of this Good Government Council. They didn't want people wasting or siphoning money off for their own purposes. So that's where a lot of the contention came up.
And 70 years later, nothing has changed. They're still talking about taxation. And will until the day I'm out of here.
By the way, Sheffield Bramwell, I dedicated the book to him mainly, and also to my parents. But we're sitting here just a mile or two from the farm that he farmed. Mm-hmm. Now, he lived in Lincoln. He grew up on Lincoln Avenue, across the street from where Al Capone used to come and visit. I still want to figure out which house Al Capone owned or rented or visited, but Bramwell grew up in that house and across the street from Capone's, and that house today is the official residence of the president of Lincoln College. And I am hoping that sometime in the next 2 days he's going to let me come over there and see where a picture that's in the book of Bramwell at age 15 sitting on a horse in front of that house with a pearl-handled revolver in the holster. It's quite a neat picture, I think. It kind of symbolizes his spirit, and I want to go see where that picture was taken, so that's my little bucket list item.
And that house, John, was the only house on that whole block from Clay Street to Union Street. There was a little clapboard house right next to that, the Orendorf black family lived in the lovely people, and the good old clapboard house, and then the what I call the Lee Wright house, or it goes back to, before then it goes back to the Lutz family,
yes,
L-U-T-Z.
Yeah, that's the Ellen, Sheffield Lutz.
Those were the only two domiciles in that entire whole block.
Yeah, Lutz had the big general store way back when down on Broadway, across from the courthouse, next to where the Vogue Theater and Boss Drug Store was, and Landauer's, those buildings along there.
Speaking of history, John A. Lutz, in that time way back, there were rather substantial Jewish residents here in this community. Hence the Lincoln Women's Club building. They built their own Jewish temple there by the Latham Park. Let's get back to your book. That's what we're here for, to sell a deeper dive. I find it interesting that 70 years hence that we read this history, and it's a good thing that you brought up some of these things back. Nothing is as important as the history of the community. And we had there was some dissension in the community, Mr. Fuller, when that first began to appear on the horizon. Those guys ought to leave them alone, or they ought to dig deeper, depending upon your persuasion wherever you were. So we want to sell that book, A Deeper Dive, because the money is going to go to the Logan County Genealogical Society, and I can't think of a better place for it to go unless it be the Salvation Army right here locally. So go ahead, Mr. Fuller. I want to throw the mic back to you, sir.
Okay. Well, one of the things that struck me was just about all the people were good people on both sides of this. That sounds like a quote somebody else just said. But Sheffield, Bram Bramwell, he makes the point in one of the recordings, which will be at these meetings tomorrow night. I've got some videos that were made up from these audio tapes and with some images of the time. And he talked about the board. He says they just didn't know what was going on. He said, I don't know. He says that's what some people say. I said, I don't know how many knew or didn't know what was going on as far as the money's being misplaced. But the impression I get overall, looking back at the material, is that most of these people, it was not intentional. Most people are good people. I've left my wallet in an airport once, and it got returned to me. It's amazing. And, but they all were trying to do well, and when it all came out in the end, most of the relationships, I think, did get repaired. But one of the things Bill touched on was the secrecy, like my dad coming over and speaking over your shoulder. He said, I hear you're with us. Is it? You said that's what he said?
That's what he said.
I can believe that. There's one tape where he's talking to the group, and there's criticism. One person resigned from the Good Government Council, a guy named William Wilson, because he didn't like the secrecy. They put out the names of who the leaders were, but the names of the members were kept secret. And because Paul Beaver wrote in his 1982 history book about at the time of the pinball raids and witnesses being brought in for the trial, they had to put state troopers around the homes of the witnesses to protect them. And in the days before that, if somebody was going to testify against the mob, they would be murdered. That's what Paul said in the book. And so when people start rocking the boat, they're nervous about retribution and revenge. And so I think that was some of the reasons for the secrecy. And the things, a lot of the meeting tomorrow night, and I'm going to be talking about, there's so many sub-stories in this that it's a lot of the financial bookkeeping and accounting practices of the county. Bill, when you asked about what things changed, the county decided shortly after these events that meeting quarterly every 3 months was not often enough. They couldn't manage things adequately that way, so they gradually shifted over to meeting monthly, and they set up a special committee to examine how money was spent. There were questions about why Logan County had so many more ballots printed than Macon County did, which Macon County had twice the population. But the printing bill, the outside auditors would come in and said, you're way above what you should be for printing of ballots. And so our local newspaper was the contract printer for that. And there were agreements that stories about gambling would not be printed in the paper.
Go figure.
Yeah, and they made a promise they wouldn't do that unless there was a tape of Roy Clapper saying that John Nugent, the publisher of the paper, told him, he says, that as long as there was no violence, he says, we're not going to publish anything negative about the gambling going on here. So there's all these undercurrents, all these sub-stories. And I didn't even get to the one about the 500 people. This made the top of above the fold front page in the Fort Wayne newspaper. 578 citizens were called in front of our circuit judge to show why they shouldn't be held in contempt of court for signing a petition. Eventually he eventually let most of them go, but three of them, Roy Clapper, Alan Wyneken, and Nelson Howarth from Springfield, he cited them for contempt of court, and it took a year of going to the Supreme Court for that to be overturned, and the judge was censured by the Illinois Bar Association for infringing on the constitutional rights to petition. And so those were kind of big things. And the county hired, they didn't used to have outside audits done, and they they decided they needed to have auditing done. So some good things came out of it as far as getting things more on the up and up. And I think you get in the ear of Pete Franz and people like that who, to my way of thinking, really ran things very well up there for the county. He was the county clerk for many years, good guy. But there's a lot of other stories, so get the book.
Really, you'll enjoy the book. It was a tough time for us here, but it was statewide, actually,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't have a complete handle on it here.
It was a network started with the mobsters back in Prohibition. When Prohibition ended, they said, how are we going to make money now? They got into gambling, and one thing led to another, but it was statewide.
Yeah, it was a big sensation when the state police came in and confiscated all the pinball machines. And fraternal orders such as the Oaks and the Moose and the Eagles, they had their own machines. And I know for a fact that the money that the proceeds they get from the Oaks went to the Crippled Children's Fund, which was about as altruistic as you can get. And by the way, those machines were heavy, and I can tell you that from experience, but I'm not going to waste any airtime on that. Anyway.
Speaking of the state police, just quickly, one of the other things I found out was prior to Adlai Stevenson's reforms, you had to be a Democrat under Dwight Green to be a state policeman.
Oh,
All
really?
of them, 100%. And so they did away with that. There's still remnants of patronage system, but I was just shocked to learn that. Whoever the governor was, I guess, I don't know how they get all I don't understand it completely, how they would get them all to, did they all have to switch parties when the governor changed?
Yeah.
Patronage was the order of the day in Joe Sapp's day when he was the Logan County Republican chairman.
Yeah.
And that's just the way the system worked. I know I had to buy tickets from him forever because I got my kid a job at the state school mowing grass. But and I was fine with that. That's just kind of the way it went. I was expected to buy those tickets. He got my kid a job. It was nothing untoward about it. That's just the way the system worked. So John Fuller, we're about right out of town. Excuse me, but I'm sorry, I get all choked up when I think about this subject.
Sorry.
We appreciate, we're going to have to ring off here at 9 o'clock
But
already.
let's ask
Go
John
ahead.
to reiterate the times
Thank
and
you,
place
honey.
of his
Yes.
meetings,
Okay.
because the proceeds from this book are going to the Genealogical Society.
100%.
We don't want to forget that, too.
Yeah.
So would you do that, John?
Yeah, 100%.
Because I'm sure people would like to come and hear this.
Tomorrow night, the 18th, Thursday night, at Lincoln College at 7 o'clock at McKinstry Library. And then the next morning, downtown in Lincoln at 9:30 at the Guest House Coffee Shop on Kickapoo Street, right across from the courthouse. If you get in the block, you'll probably be able to find it.
Very good.
Yeah, for an old timer too, it's just down from Kresge's.
Yeah, 5 and dime.
John Fuller, our guest this morning, come up all the way from Florida to try to hawk this book a little bit because the proceeds are going to benefit our Logan County Genealogical Society. And by the way, they do a whale of a job in there. I got fired from a volunteer because I was filing obituaries, and I got so interested I never got my work done. Thank you very much for Viewpoint.
Thank you.
John?